The neon lights of Omega Station's lower levels painted sharp shadows across Vena's crystalline scales as she tracked her prey. Her iridescent skin, usually a source of pride among her species, was now dampened to a dull gray that blended perfectly with the industrial environment. She'd been following the human for 3 hours, watching his seemingly aimless wandering through the station's merchant district with growing irritation. Riker Nash. That was the name in her contract. A simple bounty, hardly worth her time, but something about him had caught her attention. Perhaps it was the way he moved, too casual, too unaware of his surroundings. In her experience, humans were an annoyingly cautious species, always looking over their shoulders, especially in the lawless outer rings. This one practically invited trouble. The station's artificial night cycle was beginning, sending the more respectable inhabitants to their quarters while the nocturnal dealings of the criminal underworld stirred to life. Perfect hunting conditions. Vena flexed her fingers, feeling the familiar tingle of her neurotoxin glands preparing their paralytic secretion. One touch was all she needed. Nash turned down a narrow maintenance corridor, and Vena's inner eyelids flickered in satisfaction. The fool was making this almost too easy. The corridor led to a dead end. She'd memorized the station's layout before beginning her hunt. She moved silently, her specialized footwear absorbing any sound as she closed the distance. The human stopped at the end of the corridor, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dim emergency lighting. He was tall for his species, dressed in simple station workwear that did little to hide his athletic build. Vena's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, no fear pheromones, no nervous sweat. Strange. You know, Nash spoke without turning, his voice carrying an unexpected warmth that made Vena freeze mid-step. I was starting to worry you wouldn't take the bait. A trap. The realization hit her milliseconds before the corridor's hidden panels slid open, revealing sophisticated sensor arrays. She spun to retreat, but energy fields had already snapped into place at both ends of the corridor, trapping her in a cage of humming blue light. Nash turned, and Vena saw his face clearly for the first time. Sharp features, dark eyes that held none of the previous day's feigned carelessness, and a small scar running along his jaw. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face into something almost boyish, despite the deadly competence evident in his stance. The legendary Vena Valshiran, he said, pronouncing her full name with unexpected accuracy. I have to admit, you're even more impressive in person than your file suggested. Vena's scales rippled with anger, but she kept her voice steady. You have me at a disadvantage, human. It seems you know quite a bit about me. That was the idea. Nash stepped closer, studying her with genuine curiosity. Though I have to ask, did you really think I was just another easy mark? Or did you suspect something was wrong and come anyway? If you know who I am, you know what I'm capable of, Vena replied, her mind racing through escape scenarios. The energy field was military grade, but every system had its weaknesses. This cage won't hold me for long. Nash's smile widened. It doesn't need to. I just needed to have this conversation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small holographic projector. With a flick of his wrist, the air between them filled with floating images, surveillance footage, transport manifests, financial records. Vena recognized them immediately. They were all connected to her employer, the notorious crime lord known as the Architect. I've spent the last year tracking the Architect's operation, Nash continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. You're not just their best hunter, Vena. You're their enforcer, their problem solver. And I need your help. Vena's scales shifted to a deeper gray, a sign of her growing unease. Your law enforcement? Nash laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. Nothing that simple. Let's say I'm a private contractor with a very specific mission. The Architect has something that doesn't belong to them. Something dangerous. I need to get it back. And you think I'll help you? Vena's inner eyelids narrowed. Whatever they're paying you, the architect will double it. This isn't about money. Nash's expression grew serious. It's about preventing a war. The architect has acquired a prototype weapon, something that could destabilize the entire sector. They don't understand what they're dealing with. Venna felt a chill run down her spine. She'd noticed increased security at the architect's main facility, heard whispers of a secret project, but this was the first she'd heard of a weapon. You're lying. Am I? Nash manipulated the holographic display, bringing up new images, heavily encrypted communications, shipping containers with radiation warnings, and finally, a schematic that made Venna's blood run cold. Your employers are playing with forces they don't understand. Help me stop them, and I'll make sure you walk away clean. Venna studied the human carefully. His heart rate was steady, his scent free of deception's telltale markers. Either he was telling the truth, or he was the best liar she'd ever encountered. Both possibilities were equally disturbing. And if I refuse? Nash shrugged, but his eyes remained intense. Then I'll have to do this the hard way. And neither of us wants that. The energy field suddenly flickered and died. Venna tensed, ready for an attack, but Nash simply stepped back, giving her clear access to the corridor's exit. Think about it, he said softly. You have until tomorrow night. Meet me at the Starfall Lounge if you want to hear the full plan. Or don't, and we'll see who's really the better hunter. Venna moved past him slowly, every sense alert for treachery, but Nash remained still. Only when she reached the corridor's entrance did he speak again. One more thing, his voice carried a note of warning. I wouldn't try to warn the architect about our conversation. The evidence of their weapon program has already been transmitted to multiple interested parties. If anything happens to me, it all goes public. Venna paused but didn't turn. You're either very brave or very foolish, human. I've been called both, Nash replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. See you tomorrow, Hunter. Venna slipped away into the station's shadows, her mind churning. For the first time in years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten, uncertainty. The human had outplayed her masterfully, but more than that, he'd given her a choice. In her experience, choice was an illusion prey was offered before the kill. Yet something in Nash's words rang true. As she made her way back to her quarters, Venna realized she'd already made her decision. Tomorrow night, she would go to the Starfall Lounge. Not because Nash had convinced her, but because for the first time in her long career as a hunter, she'd found prey that promised to be truly challenging. Whether as an ally or an enemy remained to be seen. The station's artificial night deepened around her, and somewhere in its labyrinthine corridors, a human smiled, knowing she would come. The Starfall Lounge hung suspended in Omega Station's upper ring, its transparent dome offering an unobstructed view of the swirling nebula beyond. Venna sat at a corner table, her scales shifted to match the establishment's elegant deep blue decor. She'd arrived early, watching the station's elite mingle over expensive drinks and questionable deals. She sensed Nash before she saw him. Something about his presence seemed to charge the air, drawing attention even as he moved purposefully through the crowd. He'd traded his workwear for fitted formal attire that marked him as just another wealthy trader, a disguise that would have been perfect if not for the predatory grace in his movements. The famous Valshiran punctuality, Nash said as he slid into the seat across from her. I appreciate that in a potential partner. Venna's inner eyelids narrowed. We're not partners yet, human. First, you're going to tell me exactly what you're after. Nash signaled a server, ordering drinks before leaning back in his chair. Fair enough. What do you know about quantum entanglement weapons? Theoretical technology, Venna replied, her scales rippling slightly. Impossible to stabilize outside a laboratory environment. That's what everyone thought. Nash's expression darkened. Until 3 months ago, when a research facility on Nexus Prime was attacked. The prototype of their first successful QE weapon was stolen, along with all the research data. The server returned with their drinks, something amber-colored for Nash, and for Venna, a specialized cocktail that complemented her species' unique biochemistry. She took a careful sip, letting the liquid warm her secondary nervous system. "And you think the architect has this weapon?" "I know they do." Nash pulled out a small data chip, sliding it across the table. "Because I was part of the security team that failed to stop the theft." Venna picked up the chip, inserting it into her neural interface. Images and data flooded her consciousness: security footage, death certificates, classified reports. She saw Nash, wearing a different uniform, fighting alongside a team against shadowy figures. The footage ended with an explosion and static. 23 people died that night, Nash continued, his voice tight. "Including my partner. The thieves used some kind of advanced cloaking technology we'd never seen before. Technology that matches the specifications of your employer's latest security upgrades." Venna's scales shifted to a darker shade as she processed the information. The new systems. I wondered why they were installed so quickly. She looked up at Nash. "But why come to me? Why not bring in official authorities?" Nash smiled without humor. "Because officially, that weapon doesn't exist. The research was black ops, completely off the books. If word gets out that humans have developed working QE weapons, it could destabilize the entire galactic peace accord." "So you're here unofficially," Venna concluded. "A rogue agent seeking revenge." "Justice," Nash corrected. "And prevention. That weapon isn't just dangerous, it's apocalyptic. One misalignment in the quantum matrix could tear a hole in space-time. The architect's people aren't qualified to handle it, and sooner or later, they're going to make a mistake." Venna studied him carefully. His heart rate remained steady, his scent free of deception, but there was something else, a deep undercurrent of emotion that made her own pulse quicken. "You're not telling me everything," she said finally. Nash met her gaze. "No, I'm not. Just like you're not telling me why someone with your skills really works for a crime syndicate." The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Venna found herself fascinated by the play of nebula light across his features, the way his dark eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully maintained facade. "The architect's facility has 16 layers of security," she said after a long moment. "The inner sanctum, where they'd keep something this valuable, has genetic locks keyed to specific individuals. I'm one of them." "I know." Nash's smile turned genuine. "Why do you think I chose you?" "You didn't choose me," Venna countered. "You manipulated me into choosing you. Same result." Nash leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "The question is, now that you know the stakes, what are you going to do about it?" Before Venna could respond, her neural interface buzzed with an urgent alert. Her scales paled as she read the message. "We have a problem," she said, her voice tense. "The architect just ordered an emergency relocation of all high-value assets. They're moving the weapon tonight." Nash was already on his feet. "How long?" 3 hours. Venna stood, her hunter's instincts surging to the fore. "The transport ships are being prepared now. Then we're out of time for discussion." Nash's hand brushed her arm, sending an unexpected shiver through her scales. "Are you in?" Venna knew she should refuse. Should alert security, maintain her cover, fulfill her contract. But the memory of those death certificates burned in her mind, along with the devastating potential of the weapon. And underneath it all, the irresistible pull of the most dangerous hunt of her career. "Yes," she said finally. "But we do this my way. No more surprises." Nash's answering grin held equal parts relief and anticipation. "Wouldn't dream of it. Though I should mention one small detail, we're probably going to have company." As if on cue, Vena's enhanced senses picked up movement at the lounge's entrance. 6 figures in civilian clothes, moving with too much purpose to be casual patrons. The architect's elite security team, she hissed. They must have tracked you here. Actually, Nash drew a compact energy weapon from beneath his jacket. They were tracking you. Seems your employer doesn't take chances with their top hunter. Vena's scales flushed with anger and something else, excitement. You knew this would happen. I suspected. Nash's expression turned serious. Last chance to back out. Vena's answer was to release her neurotoxin claws and drop into a fighting stance. Try to keep up, human. The first shots lit up the lounge's elegant interior, and chaos erupted as patrons scattered. As Vena moved in perfect synchronization with her new ally, she realized this hunt had become something far more complicated than she'd ever anticipated. And somehow, she couldn't wait to see where it led. The maintenance tunnels beneath Omega Station echoed with the sound of pursuit. Vena and Nash moved swiftly through the labyrinth of pipes and conduits, their footsteps masked by the constant hum of the station's massive engines. Behind them, the heavy boots of the architect's security team grew steadily closer. That was quite an exit, Nash said as they ducked through a narrow service passage. His formal jacket was gone, shirt sleeve torn and singed from an energy blast that had come too close. I especially liked the part where you threw that guard through the drinks cabinet. You're bleeding, Vena replied, her enhanced vision picking up the dark stain spreading across his shoulder. The wound made her scales ripple with unexpected concern. Just a graze. Nash checked the compact holomap projected from his wrist device. We need to get to docking bay 7 before they finish loading that weapon. Any shortcuts you'd care to share? Vena's inner eyelids narrowed as she considered their options. The station's maintenance level was her territory, she'd used these tunnels for countless hunts. But now she was the one being hunted, and every route carried risk. There's a vertical shaft 2 sections ahead, she said finally. It leads directly to the cargo processing level. But it's not designed for organic transport. Nash's grin flashed in the dim light. Those are my favorite kind of shortcuts. A burst of weapons fire cut through the air behind them, scorching the wall where they'd stood moments before. Vena grabbed Nash's uninjured arm, pulling him into a side tunnel just as more security forces appeared at the corridor's far end. They're trying to hurt us, she hissed, her scales darkening with frustration. These tunnels are designed with choke points. Standard hunting protocol. Then let's change the game. Nash pulled a small device from his belt, quickly programming something into its interface. How good are you at improvising? Better than you, apparently, Vena retorted, but there was no real bite in her words. Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, she felt more alive than she had in years. Working with Nash was like dancing on the edge of a plasma storm, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Nash tossed the device down the tunnel they'd just left. Moments later, an explosion rocked the corridor, followed by the distinctive hiss of ruptured coolant pipes. Dense vapor began filling the space, blocking both visual and thermal tracking. That'll slow them down, Nash said, already moving again. But we've got another problem. The weapon transport's been moved up. We have less than 30 minutes before it leaves the station. Vena's tongue flicked out, tasting the metallic tang of the station's recycled air. The vertical shaft is our only option then. But if you're not strong enough to make the climb. She let the challenge hang in the air between them. Nash's response was to step closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the intriguing mix of human adrenaline and something uniquely him. Worried about me? His voice dropped lower, sending an unexpected shiver through her scales. That's not very professional of you, Hunter. Before Vena could respond, more weapons fire peppered the corridor. They broke apart, moving in perfect synchronization as they fought their way forward. Vena's neurotoxin claws found their mark twice, dropping attackers with surgical precision, while Nash's energy weapon picked off targets with unsettling accuracy. They reached the vertical shaft, a narrow tube stretching up through the station's infrastructure, filled with power conduits and maintenance drones. Nash studied it for a moment, then began removing pieces of his remaining tactical gear. The drones use magnetic tracks to move through here, he explained, attaching sophisticated-looking clips to his boots and gloves. These should let us do the same. Unless you've got a better idea? Vena's scales rippled in amusement as she extended the natural climbing hooks hidden beneath her forearm plates. Some of us don't need technology for everything. Nash's laugh was interrupted by the sound of approaching reinforcements. Race you to the top? They began their ascent just as the security team rounded the corner. Vena moved with fluid grace, her species' natural climbing abilities making the shaft walls as easy to navigate as level ground. Nash kept pace surprisingly well, his makeshift magnetic gear allowing him to practically run up the vertical surface. Halfway up, one of Nash's magnetic clips failed, leaving him dangling precariously from one hand. Without hesitation, Vena swung down to his level, her scales brushing against him as she helped him regain his grip. Now who's worried about whom? Nash managed through gritted teeth, his injured shoulder clearly protesting the strain. I simply prefer not to waste useful resources, Vena replied, but she stayed close as they continued their climb, ready to assist if needed. They emerged into the cargo processing level just as alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights cast everything in a pulsing red glow as dock workers and security personnel rushed to evacuate the area. They're implementing lockdown procedures, Vena said, her hunter's instincts screaming warnings. We'll never reach the docking bay now. We don't need to. Nash pulled up a new holomap, this one showing the station's power distribution grid. The weapons containment system requires massive amounts of energy. They'll have to tap directly into the station's main reactor conduits. Vena's eyes widened as she understood. The junction room. We can intercept them there. Exactly. Nash checked his weapons charge. But we'll only get one shot at this. If we fail, we won't. Vena found herself reaching out, her scaled hand brushing against his face. Trust your hunter. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities and unspoken words. Then Nash's hand covered hers, warm against her cool scales, and Vena felt something shift in her carefully ordered world. Always, he said softly, and somehow that single word carried more weight than any elaborate promise could have. The moment was broken by the sound of heavy security doors slamming shut throughout the level. They pulled apart, both returning to mission focus, but something had changed. They were no longer just reluctant allies in a dangerous game. They had become something more, partners, equals, and perhaps something else entirely. As they moved toward their final confrontation, Vena realized that for the first time in her life, she was no longer just hunting for the thrill or the contract. She was hunting to protect something, someone, that mattered. And that made her more dangerous than ever before. The junction room thrummed with raw power, massive conduits carrying enough energy to sustain a small planet pulsing with barely contained plasma. Vena and Nash crouched behind a bank of transformers, watching as the architect's team prepared the quantum entanglement weapon for transport. The device itself was smaller than Vena had expected, a sleek cylinder barely larger than her arm, suspended in a containment field that drew power directly from the station's reactor. But the readouts on her neural interface confirmed its devastating potential. The weapon's quantum matrix was already showing signs of instability. 8 guards, she whispered, her scales automatically shifting to match the metallic surfaces around them. Plus 3 technicians. The woman in the lab coat, that's Dr. Rivik. She's the architect's head of research. Nash's expression hardened as he studied the scientist. She was there the night of the theft. She helped them bypass our security systems. His hand tightened on his weapon. She watched my partner die. Venna felt an unfamiliar twist in her chest at the pain in his voice. Nash, what aren't you telling me about that night? For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice barely audible over the room's mechanical symphony. The partner I lost, Talia, she wasn't just my teammate. She was my sister. And she wasn't supposed to be there that night. Nash's eyes never left Dr. Rivik. She was investigating something in the research division. Something about the weapon being compromised. She tried to warn me, but before she could explain. The implications hit Venna like a physical blow. The theft was an inside job. Nash nodded grimly. The whole thing was staged to cover up what they'd done to the weapon. Talia found out, so they eliminated her. But they didn't get her final message. He pulled out a small data crystal. I've spent the last 3 months decoding it. Before Venna could respond, alarms blared through the junction room. Dr. Rivik rushed to a control panel, her face pale. The containment field is failing, she shouted. The quantum matrix is collapsing. That's impossible, one of the technicians protested. We followed all the stabilization protocols. No, Nash said softly. You followed the protocols you were given. But they were designed to fail. Understanding dawned in Venna's mind. The architect never wanted the weapon. They wanted what would happen when it failed. Nash's voice was tight with controlled rage. A quantum catastrophe would destroy half the station, maybe more. The perfect cover for something else. Venna's hunter instincts screamed a warning. She grabbed Nash's arm, pulling him deeper into cover just as new figures entered the junction room. Her scales paled as she recognized the distinctive armor of the architect's personal guard. And behind them. No, she breathed. The architect himself stepped into view. Not the mysterious figure Venna had worked for all these years, but a face she knew all too well. Admiral Theron Kane, head of station security and the man responsible for enforcing the Galactic Peace Accords. Right on schedule, Kane announced, his cultured voice carrying easily over the chaos. Dr. Rivik, excellent work. The weapons containment failure will provide the perfect evidence of illegal human weapons research. The diplomatic fallout will be devastating. A false flag operation, Nash whispered. Start a war, blame it on humanity's weapons program. And in the chaos, no one will notice what's really being stolen. Venna's scales darkened with fury as the pieces fell into place. The station's secure databases. Everything about every species' weapons research, defense capabilities, classified technologies. All safely copied and ready for transport, Kane confirmed to his subordinates. By the time anyone realizes what really happened, we'll be long gone. And the galaxy will be too busy with their new war to look for us. The weapons containment field flickered ominously, casting strange shadows through the junction room. Warning klaxons intensified as the quantum matrix continued its calculated descent into chaos. Venna turned to Nash, seeing her own decision mirrored in his eyes. They had minutes, maybe less, before the weapons collapse reached critical mass. The smart play would be to run, to get as far from the blast zone as possible. But that had never been their style. I count 12 new hostiles, she said, her neurotoxin claws extending. Plus the original security team. And one corrupt admiral, Nash added, checking his weapons charge. Not great odds. Worried? His answering smile made her scales tingle. About missing my chance to dance with you after this is over? Maybe a little. Venna's inner eyelids flickered in surprise, but before she could respond, Nash had already moved. He rolled from cover, his first shots taking down 2 of Kane's guards before anyone could react. Venna followed instantly, her natural camouflage making her nearly invisible as she struck from the opposite direction. The junction room erupted into chaos. Energy weapons filled the air with deadly light as both sides opened fire. Vena moved like liquid shadow, her claws finding vulnerable points in armor with lethal precision. Nash fought with controlled fury, each shot and movement calculated for maximum effect. They reached the weapon's containment unit together, moving in perfect synchronization as if they'd fought side by side for years instead of hours. But as Nash began working to stabilize the quantum matrix, Vena saw Admiral Kane raise his weapon, aiming not at them, but at the main power conduit above their heads. Time seemed to slow. She saw the shot leave Kane's weapon, saw Nash focused on the weapon's controls, unaware of the imminent danger. In that frozen moment, Vena had a choice to make. And for the first time in her life as a hunter, the choice was easy. She moved. Pain exploded across Vena's back as she slammed into Nash, throwing them both clear of Kane's shot. The energy blast struck the power conduit, sending a cascade of sparks and superheated plasma raining down. Through the haze of agony, she felt Nash's arms around her, pulling her behind the relative safety of a massive transformer. "That was stupid," he said, his voice rough with emotion as he examined her injuries. "Brave, but stupid." "You're welcome." Vena's scales flickered weakly, trying to maintain their camouflage despite her body's trauma. "The weapon. We'll have to wait." Nash's hand brushed her face, unnaturally warm against her cooling scales. "You're more important." The declaration hung between them, weighted with meaning, but another explosion rocked the junction room before either could speak further. Kane's voice cut through the chaos. "How touching," the Admiral sneered. "My best hunter, brought low by human sentiment. I expected better from you, Vena. The quantum matrix is reaching critical threshold." Dr. Rivik's panicked voice rose above the weapon's fire. "Sir, we need to evacuate." "No one's going anywhere." Nash's voice was cold as he checked his weapon. "Vena, can you move?" She responded by pushing herself up, ignoring the searing pain along her back. Her specialized biology was already working to repair the damage, but it would take time they didn't have. "I can fight." "I had something else in mind." Nash pulled out the data crystal containing his sister's final message. "Cover me." Understanding flashed between them. Vena moved to the edge of their cover, her natural camouflage still functional enough to create confusion among their attackers. Nash took advantage of the distraction, sprinting toward the weapon's control console. "Stop him," Kane ordered, but his guards were too busy dealing with Vena's lightning-fast strikes to respond effectively. Nash reached the console, inserting the crystal into its interface. Immediately, new code began flooding the weapon systems, Talia's final gift to her brother. "What are you doing?" Dr. Rivik demanded, trying to counter his actions from her own terminal. "The containment field is already failing." "Wrong." Nash's fingers flew across the controls. "The field is doing exactly what my sister designed it to do. You just didn't know she was the one who really created the containment protocols." Vena saw the moment Kane understood. The Admiral's composed facade cracked, replaced by genuine fear. "Kill them. Kill them now." But it was too late. The weapon's quantum matrix suddenly stabilized, its unstable energy redirecting through new pathways. Instead of causing a catastrophic explosion, the device began systematically copying its own data, including records of every modification and access code used since its theft. "No." Kane raised his weapon, aiming directly at Nash's head. "I won't let you ruin everything." Vena moved without thinking, her injured body protesting as she launched herself through the air. Her claws found Kane's throat just as his finger tightened on the trigger. The shot went wide, missing Nash by centimeters. They crashed to the ground together, Kane's guards unable to fire without risking hitting their leader. The Admiral fought with desperate strength, but Vena had been a hunter too long to let her prey escape. Her neurotoxin entered his bloodstream, and she watched the realization dawn in his eyes as his body began to paralyze. The evidence has already been transmitted to every major security force in the sector, Nash announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Including proof of the Admiral's involvement in my sister's murder. It's over. The remaining guards looked at each other uncertainly, then slowly lowered their weapons. Dr. Rivik tried to run but didn't make it 3 steps before Vena's precisely thrown blade pinned her lab coat to the wall. Station security forces, the legitimate ones, began pouring into the junction room, alerted by the weapon's automated broadcasts. In the chaos of arrests and explanations that followed, Vena found herself standing beside Nash, watching as Kane and his conspirators were led away. "Your sister would be proud," she said softly. Nash turned to her, and the intensity in his eyes made her scales ripple despite her injuries. "Thank you. For everything." "So," Vena's inner eyelids flickered with amusement, "about that dance you mentioned." His laugh was interrupted by the arrival of official investigators, demanding statements and explanations. But his hand found hers in the confusion, warm fingers intertwining with cool scales, and Vena felt something settle in her soul. She had spent her life being the perfect hunter, believing that the thrill of the chase was all she needed. But standing there, her injuries healing and her hand held firmly in Nash's, she realized she had found something better. Not just a worthy opponent or a skilled partner, but someone who saw past her fearsome reputation to the person beneath. Hours later, after the statements were given and the evidence secured, they stood together in the Starfall Lounge where their partnership had begun. The nebula beyond the dome painted everything in soft, shifting colors, and Nash pulled her gently onto the dance floor. "You know," he said as they moved together, his hand warm on her waist, "for someone who hunts alone, you're a surprisingly good dance partner." Vena's scales shifted to a pleased iridescence. "Perhaps I was just waiting for the right partner." Nash's smile held promises of adventures to come. "Then I suppose we'll have to see what other talents we can discover together." "Indeed." Vena leaned closer, her scales brushing against him. "After all, the best hunts are the ones that never truly end." As they danced beneath the stars, Vena reflected that sometimes the greatest prizes came not from catching your prey, but from letting yourself be caught in return. She had begun this hunt as the galaxy's most feared predator, but she was ending it as something far more interesting, a partner, a protector, and perhaps even a lover. And somehow, that felt like the greatest victory of all.